All right. We talked about the Redlegs and 4-4 start. Kind enough to join us, I'm assuming from Atlanta. I'm assuming that Bob Nightengale Jr. Is still with it. It's too early to be taking road trips off. It's the first road trip of the year. Bobby, how's everything down there in Atlanta? Has the rain ever stopped down there in Atlanta?
It's actually warm here. Like Philadelphia was freezing, so glad that it's finally warm and baseball will be played without rain delays this week.
Walk me through. I know the small sample size. I get it, but I think most people going in on paper, they're saying the Reds are a disaster and they're never going to win 60 games and blah blah blah. You've heard it all before. They're 4-4. What's sort of been your observations about the team through the first 8 games this year?
I think probably the most important thing is the 3 young starters they got, Lodolo, Green, and Ashcraft. Green hasn't had the results from his first 2 starts, but I think all 3 are a lot better than they were for most of last season, especially Lodolo. He's been as dominant as any pitcher in baseball so far. So I think that's probably the one thing, like, they had to have something, that part go right in their rebuild. I mean, if you want to look for the Reds in the future to be a true playoff contender, those 3 have to be part of it. They have to be healthy. They have to be pitching well. And I think all 3, especially Lodolo and Ashcraft, have seen the results from their first couple of starts of the season, that, those guys are taking steps forward. I think Green's pitched better than his numbers indicate. His fastball and slider is still an elite pairing. So I'm pretty bullish on those 3 going forward. And then hitting-wise, I mean, they found ways to scrape across runs. They don't have the bangers in the lineup that they probably did in the past couple of years. There's no Jesse Winker, no Eugenio Suarez, but they're still finding ways to grind out runs, which is something they really kind of had trouble doing probably since the last 3-4 seasons. So, that's been a positive for them.
Bobby, you talk about the offense for a minute. The first, what would it have been? The first 5 games of the year. And again, I understand it's only 5 games, but I mean, they were getting big time production. The bats really quieted down over the weekend in Philadelphia. When you talk to some of these guys, and whether it's, Friedel, who's all of a sudden, becoming kind of a spark plug of the team, much has been made about Stevenson and India coming back and having a bounce back year and that kind of thing. Do some of these guys, not as much India and Stevenson, but for some of the others, Steer, Friedel, some of these guys, do they feel like, that this is their sort of year to get their career on track? Does that make sense? You know where I'm going with this?
Yeah, and I think you're right. Jonathan India actually mentioned it kind of right before the season started, saying, hey, Joey Votto and Will Myers are the only guys who really have been paid on this team. It's a lot of guys who, this is your chance to build a career for yourself. You're going to get playing time. Take TJ Friedel, for example. He was up and down in the minor leagues, kind of riding that shuttle between the Reds and the Louisville Bats last year, the year before, kind of viewed as a 4th outfielder. Now he earns a chance to be the starting center fielder with Nick Senzel out. And as you said, kind of the spark plug. I mean, he's hitting for power. He's making things happen with his bunting. And it's just one of those, I think guys are looking at it, especially Steer, starting every day at third base, looking at themselves saying, okay, this is a time when I have to, kind of carve out a career for myself. And I do think that's kind of a motivating factor for a lot of guys. Jake Fraley, too. He had a big hit yesterday against the Phillies. Another guy who you look at it, okay, this is before a lot of these prospects come up, I'm going to get a ton of playing time. And if I can make the most out of it, I'm going to be a part of this team for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's kind of like getting guys in the last year of a free agent deal. It's a different situation, very different in terms of accomplishments leading up to that free agent year. But I've always been a big fan of finding guys in a sport where the money is completely guaranteed. I mean, we talk about a football contract and a guy gets, $11 million guaranteed over 4 years. These baseball players are getting guaranteed every penny no matter what. But I do think there's a lot to be said for finding guys who are hungry. And I think it's probably fair to say, you agree, Bobby, they have a lot of guys. We'll find out how good or bad they are, but they certainly are not suffering from a lack of hunger on this team.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit on that. I mean, just saying, guys that not last year free agent deals, going into free agency, but guys like Brandon Drury, he was on a non-roster deal. You saw the success he had. Tyler Naquin a couple years ago, same thing. Jason Vossler was one of the last guys to make this team out of camp, and look at the start he's having with Joey Votto injured to start the year. So, I mean, I think that's true for a lot of these hitters and even pitchers. I mean, like Fernando Cruz was on the last legs of his career, made it to the major leagues last year, and has had an up and down start so far to this season, but he's a guy that I think you can build around in the bullpen. Alex Young, the left-hander, has been really solid. He was a non-roster guy. Derek Law is another guy who's kind of been floating around the minor leagues. Reds gave him a chance, and he's kind of ran with it. So it's a lot of these guys. I mean, whether they're older guys and they caught on with the Reds, and now it's kind of the last legs of their career, or it's young guys, fighting to build a career for themselves and, trying to earn true paychecks once you get to free agency. I think they have a good kind of clubhouse culture that everyone's kind of feeding off each other and creating kind of that competitive environment.
Walk me through, Bobby, and the fans about where the team is with some of its injured players. Let's start with Votto. I know he's down at AAA Louisville. When do you think we see him with a big league club? Any guess?
I don't think it'll be this road trip. Probably the weekend at the earliest. But he's really struggled. I mean, he's striking out a lot at Louisville. I think it's more than half of his plate appearances at Louisville have been strikeouts. Part of that I think is expected. I think he's talked about kind of getting back to game speed, and I saw he talked to Trent Rosecrans from The Athletic this weekend, saying it was the right move to start in Louisville, and he would have lied to himself if he tried to come back and said he was ready. So I think that's part of it is just testing out things and getting back to game speed is leading to the strikeouts. But he wants to come back and be a contributing player. I mean, if he didn't, I think he would have came back for opening day. So, I think a fast start is important to him. So I do think he might wait a little bit just to try to get up to more speed. But physically, I think he's pretty close to 100% healthy. It's just in terms of kind of going through spring training at real speed versus the spring he had was more playing catch up the first week of spring where he was versus being at that last week of spring training and being ready for the season.
They seem like they're in a little bit of a tricky spot. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you see it differently, with Senzel. Because, look, we all know Senzel, former top, first-round draft pick out of Tennessee. They've changed in positions multiple times. He's gone through just a laundry list of injuries. And again, this year with the toe and trying to get going. Not only of getting him healthy and up to the major league club, but then what to do with him, Bobby, once he gets to the major league club. Any guess on how that might play out for him?
Yeah, I think they're going to use him as a utility guy. Just a guy who, on his rehab assignment right now, he's playing third base and center field. I think in center field, you could see a platoon with him and TJ Friedl. Friedel's left-handed hitter, Senzel's right-handed hitter. So I could see a natural split that way. But I think there's going to be more pressure on him to hit this year. In the past, I think it's kind of been, Senzel's going to start every day in center field. Got to find out what you have with him if he's healthy. But, when he was healthy last year, he played the second most games on the team. He didn't hit the way the Reds needed him to. So I think there's more pressure on that front. But I think there's ways to get him in the lineup regularly, even if you're moving him around positions. Maybe you play some corner outfield. But him being a right-handed hitter, especially in the outfield where there's a ton of lefties, I think there's ways to get him in the lineup regularly, even if he might not be the everyday center fielder.
Bobby, I'm curious if you saw in spring training at all, because based on what I saw last year, and nothing has changed in my observations of this year, India is not a second baseman. I mean, the guy is just not defensively. He is not a second baseman. And you know what? In this day and age, I think it used to be before the shift. I think that you could hide a second baseman when you were allowed to shift. You could hide a second baseman who is not a good defender. You can't hide that as much now with no shift. He's a good offensive player. I think the guy's a team leader. He seems like he cares. There are a lot of things to love about the guy. But do you think the Reds are even flirting with the idea of him changing positions? He started as a third baseman in college, and now he's gone to second base in the big leagues.
Yeah, I think it's one of those, if a prospect pushes him off second base, that's the conversation they'll have at that time. Right now, he's kind of their best option for second base at the big league level. But say Matt McClain keeps hitting at AAA, say Ellie De La Cruz comes up and Jose Barrero's hitting great at shortstop, and they need a spot to put him. Maybe that's a conversation you have. I don't think there's anything actively, trying to move India, but I could see long term where he's a guy that could get shifted to the outfield just because you have so many middle infield prospects with the Reds. At some point, you're going to have to try to find a way to fit all these guys, and especially Matt McClain, if he's not going to be a shortstop at the big league level, which he could be. But second base is where he plays a lot of his time too. And at some point, I think he's one of the more guys that I think is close to the big leagues than is more polished than a lot of the other prospects they have.
Yeah, but the thing that's interesting about that is, Bobby, and it's the last thing I'll ask you about, is, you have Barrero, and everybody felt like spring training he was really ready to play and all that kind of thing. And not a lot of games yet, so we'll see. But when he's not played, Newman has played very well, very, very well, and has swung the bat. So do you sort of, in the pecking order, if you decide Barrero's not the guy, are you then going to just leapfrog, say, Newman, and go ahead and bump up McClain and just run him out there at shortstop regularly?
I think eventually it's going to be prospects. I mean, I don't think Kevin Newman's your long-term answer at shortstop, but I think he's a great stopgap until the prospects kind of force your hand. It's one of those, if McClain's hitting 300 in June and he forces his way up, that's a great thing. That's a great problem to have where you have too many shortstops and you have to kind of find ways to fit everyone. If he's not hitting, I think Kevin Newman, he's played solid defense, was a Gold Glove finalist a couple years ago at shortstop. So a great guy to have there, and he hits really well against left-handed pitching. But I think it's one of those, I think the Reds are just going to take the wait and see, wait till the Ellie De La Cruz, wait till the Matt McClains are playing well enough to force your hand.
All righty. Bobby, we thank you for taking the time. 3 games in Atlanta, then you're right back at it. Heck, you don't have another off day. Maybe you do, but the team does not have another off day now until the 27th of this month, with 3 in Atlanta starting tonight, Philly coming back into town, Tampa Bay coming into town. Maybe they'll be like 15-0 by the time they get here.
They don't lose, and they win every game by 4 or 5 runs, so we'll see.
Yeah, they're amazing. Bobby, thanks for your time, my friend. Hope you had a happy Easter, and we'll catch up sometime soon, I hope. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All righty. Bob Nightengale Jr. on the Reds beat. 3 in hot Atlanta, boys.